Caleb Mercer froze in his bedroom doorway, heart hammering against his ribs. Someone was cooking in his kitchen. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted through his small apartment, familiar scents in an impossible situation. He lived alone with his 8-year-old daughter, Maya. She was still asleep. The locks were intact. But through the narrow hallway, he could see a woman's silhouette moving confidently at his stove, humming softly as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. The woman turned and Caleb's blood ran cold. It was Adrienne Voss, his new boss's wife, wearing his shirt. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The Monday morning sunlight cut through Caleb's bedroom window at exactly 6:47 a.m., the same way it had every morning for the past 3 years. He'd trained himself to wake without an alarm. Maya was a light sleeper, and every extra minute of rest mattered for an 8-year-old who still sometimes woke crying from nightmares about the accident that took her mother. Caleb had developed routines, rigid, dependable routines that kept their small world from falling apart. Wake at 6:47, shower by 6:50, coffee brewing by 7 o'clock. Maya awake by 7:15, breakfast by 7:30. Out the door by 8 o'clock for her school, then his commute to the new job that had finally pulled them back from the edge of disaster. Except this morning, someone had rewritten his script. The smell hit him first. Fresh coffee. Not the instant powder he rationed to make last through the month, but real coffee, the kind that filled the air with warmth and comfort. And bacon. Actual bacon, sizzling in a pan. Caleb sat up slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. Maya couldn't cook. He'd barely let her use the microwave. Their apartment was on the 4th floor, locks engaged, chain secure. He'd checked them himself before bed, the same way he did every night, because single fathers in buildings like this didn't take chances. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. 6:52 a.m. 5 minutes off schedule, and his entire morning had become unrecognizable. The floorboards creaked under his weight as he stood. He'd memorized which ones made noise, learned to avoid them when he got up for Maya's midnight water requests or bad dreams. But now he stepped deliberately on every one, announcing his presence, his hand instinctively reaching for the baseball bat he kept beside his dresser. The hallway stretched longer than its actual 12 feet. His daughter's door remained closed, her fairy lights still glowing softly underneath. She was safe. That singular fact kept Caleb's panic from spiraling completely out of control. But someone was definitely in his kitchen. He could hear her now, a woman, humming something classical he didn't recognize, the sound of a spatula against cast iron, the quiet confidence of someone completely at ease in a space that wasn't theirs. Caleb rounded the corner, bat raised, and stopped dead. Adrienne Voss stood at his stove, barefoot, wearing one of his old university t-shirts that hung to her mid-thigh. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She was plating bacon with the kind of casual precision that suggested she cooked like this every morning. On his counter sat a bag of groceries he definitely hadn't purchased: real eggs, fresh bread, orange juice, and a glass bottle. She glanced up as if she'd been expecting him. "Good morning, Caleb." Her voice carried the same calm authority he'd heard 4 days ago at the company gala, where she'd stood beside her husband, Victor Voss, greeting employees with practiced grace. "I made coffee. I hope you don't mind that I used your French press. I found it in the back of your cabinet." Caleb's grip tightened on the bat. "What are you doing in my apartment?" "Cooking breakfast." She turned back to the stove, flipping an egg with infuriating casualness. "You left your door unlocked last night." "I didn't." "You did." She met his eyes again, and something in her expression made him pause. Not fear, not manipulation. Something harder to name. "I checked twice before I came in. I needed to be sure you weren't the kind of person who would have heard me and called the police immediately." "I should call them now." "You could." Adrienne slid the eggs onto a plate beside the bacon, then added 2 slices of toast from his toaster, which he'd rescued from a sidewalk pile 3 months ago and repaired with YouTube tutorials. "But you won't, because you're standing here trying to figure out what this means for your job, and whether I'm going to tell my husband that you threatened me with a baseball bat." Caleb lowered the bat slightly. His mind was cataloging details with the same desperate efficiency that had gotten him through 2 years of unemployment, eviction notices, and his daughter's increasing anxiety. Adrienne Voss was married to the CEO of Voss Global Solutions, a company worth several $billions. Caleb had started working there exactly 1 week ago as a senior systems analyst, a position that paid 3 times what he'd made at his last job and came with health insurance that finally covered Maya's therapy appointments. He couldn't afford to lose this job. He couldn't afford anything, really, which was exactly why this woman's presence in his kitchen felt less like a random intrusion and more like a detonation device placed carefully in the center of his life. "How did you get in?" he asked quietly. "Your landlord gave me a key." She poured coffee into 2 mugs, his mug and one she must have brought herself, because he only owned 3 and 2 were currently in the sink. "I told him I was your sister, visiting from Philadelphia. He was very concerned about whether you were managing okay with the little one." His words. "That doesn't explain why you're here." "No, it doesn't." Adrienne picked up both mugs and walked past him into the small living room, settling onto his second-hand couch as if they were about to have a perfectly ordinary conversation. "Sit down, Caleb. We need to talk before Maya wakes up." The mention of his daughter's name sent ice through his veins. "Don't." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Don't say her name. Don't pretend you know anything about her. And don't sit on my couch like you belong here." Adrienne took a slow sip of her coffee, studying him over the rim. "Your daughter is 8 years old. She's in 3rd grade at Madison Elementary. Her teacher is Mrs. Patterson. She's struggling with math but loves art class. She's been seeing a child psychologist named Dr. Reyes every other Thursday since last February. You're 45 days behind on rent, but you paid it all yesterday with your first paycheck plus late fees. You buy her clothes from the Goodwill on Morrison Street because they have a children's section that doesn't look too obviously secondhand. And 3 months ago, you sold your wedding ring to pay for her school supplies." Caleb's hands were shaking. "Get out." "I know all of this because my husband knows all of this." Adrienne set down her mug. "Victor has known exactly where you were and what you were doing for the past 6 years, since your father died." The bat slipped from Caleb's fingers, clattering against the floor. "What did you say?" "Your father, Thomas Mercer. He died 6 years ago. Heart attack, very sudden. You were working in Chicago at the time. You came home for the funeral, settled his affairs, and went back to your life." Adrienne's voice remained steady, factual. "What you didn't know was that 23 years earlier, your father saved my husband from bankruptcy. Victor was 31 years old, drowning in debt from a business venture that had collapsed. Your father, who was Victor's accountant at the time, took out a second mortgage on his house and gave Victor the money to stay afloat. He never asked for repayment, never mentioned it to anyone, including you." Caleb sank into the armchair across from her, his mind struggling to process the words. His father had been a quiet man, methodical and private. He'd worked as a small firm accountant his entire life, lived in the same modest house for 40 years, and left behind an estate that barely covered his funeral expenses. "You're lying." "I have the documents in my car." Adrienne's expression didn't change. "Transfer records, loan paperwork, a notarized letter your father wrote explaining that he didn't want Victor to feel obligated. He just wanted to help a young man who reminded him of himself." "If this is true, why didn't Victor ever say anything? Why didn't he help my father when—" Caleb stopped, the words catching in his throat. "When your father got sick?" Adrienne finished quietly. "When he spent his last 2 years fighting cancer and depleting his savings on treatments? When he died with $17,000 in medical debt?" "Yes." The word came out broken. "Because your father made Victor promise never to tell you. He said his son was proud and that you'd built your own life through your own work, and he didn't want that tainted by feeling like you owed someone a debt you never agreed to carry." Adrienne leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Victor kept that promise. He stayed away from your father's funeral. He watched from a distance as you struggled through your grief. And when you lost your job in Chicago 3 years ago and moved back here with your daughter, he continued to watch." "That's insane. That's loyalty." Adrienne's voice hardened slightly. "My husband is many things, Caleb, but he doesn't forget his debts. When you applied for the position at Voss Global Solutions 2 months ago, he made sure your application reached the right people. He didn't fabricate your qualifications. Those are real. He didn't rig the interviews. You earned your way through those. But he did ensure you had the opportunity to compete fairly for a position you were overqualified for. Caleb's head was spinning. So I'm what? Some kind of charity case? You're a talented systems analyst who was unemployed because you refused to relocate away from your daughter's support network. You're also the son of the man who saved my husband's life. Adrienne stood, walking back to the kitchen to retrieve the plates of food. Victor wanted to help you the way your father helped him. Quietly, without fanfare or expectation. Then why are you here? Caleb asked. If this was supposed to be some noble secret gesture, why are you in my apartment telling me everything? Adrienne set a plate in front of him. The eggs were perfect, the bacon crispy, the toast golden. She'd even found the butter he kept in the back of his refrigerator. Because I need your help, she said simply. And I can't ask for it without you understanding why you can actually trust me. Trust you? You broke into my home. I used a key, and I needed to prove that I know things about you that would destroy your life if they became public. Your financial struggles, your daughter's therapy, the fact that you were hired because of a connection you didn't know existed. Adrienne sat down across from him again. I needed you to understand that I'm taking an enormous risk by being here. If Victor knew I was talking to you, if anyone saw me come into this building, it would be catastrophic for both of us. And Caleb stared at the woman who had somehow turned his entire world inside out in the span of 15 minutes. What kind of help are you asking for? The kind that could cost you everything you just got back. Adrienne's composure finally cracked, just slightly, revealing something raw underneath. I found something at the company, financial records that don't make sense. Money moving through our charitable foundation in patterns that are too deliberate to be mistakes. Accounts that exist on paper but can't be traced to actual recipients. It's buried deep, hidden under layers of legitimate transactions, but it's there. You think your husband is embezzling from his own charity? I think someone is. And I think Victor either knows about it or is being carefully kept in the dark by people he trusts. Adrienne's hands trembled slightly around her coffee mug. I've tried to investigate quietly, but I'm his wife. Every move I make is watched. Every question I ask gets back to him. I can't access the systems I need without triggering alerts. But you can. I've been there a week. I barely know where the bathrooms are. You're a senior systems analyst with full network access. You have legitimate reasons to review data structures and audit trail logs. If you found something unusual while doing routine security checks, no one would question it. Adrienne leaned forward. I'm not asking you to steal anything or break any laws. I'm asking you to look, to verify what I've found, to help me understand if I'm seeing patterns that aren't there or if something genuinely criminal is happening under my husband's name. Caleb pushed the plate away, his appetite completely gone. And if I say no, then I leave, and you never see me again. You keep your job, you provide for Maya. You build the life your father wanted for you. Adrienne's voice softened, and I continue trying to prove something I can't prove. Married to a man I can no longer trust, wondering if I'm protecting a criminal or abandoning someone who's being framed. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair. Adrienne stood, pulling a small USB drive from her pocket and setting it on the coffee table. Everything I've found is on there. Financial records, account numbers, transaction patterns. Look at it when you're ready. If you decide it's nothing, delete it and forget this conversation ever happened. If you think I'm right, she paused, then we'll figure out what to do next. Footsteps padded down the hallway, small, hesitant footsteps that Caleb would recognize anywhere. Daddy? Maya stood in the doorway, her blonde hair tangled from sleep, clutching her stuffed elephant. Her eyes widened when she saw Adrienne. Oh! Adrienne's entire demeanor shifted, softening into something that looked almost maternal. You must be Maya. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to wake you. Who are you? Maya's voice was quiet, uncertain. She always got shy around strangers, especially women, a trauma response Dr. Reyes said might never fully go away. I'm a friend of your dad's from work. Adrienne smiled gently. I brought breakfast. Are you hungry? Maya looked at Caleb, seeking permission. He managed a nod, and she crept forward, climbing into his lap with the practiced ease of a child who'd spent too many mornings seeking reassurance that her remaining parent wasn't going to disappear. There's bacon, Adrienne offered, and I can make you eggs if you'd like. How do you prefer them? Scrambled, Maya whispered. With cheese, if we have it. I brought cheese. Adrienne headed back to the kitchen, giving them space. Your dad has good taste in coffee, but terrible taste in refrigerator inventory. Despite everything, Caleb felt his daughter relax slightly against his chest. Maya was a good judge of character, better than he was, probably. She'd refused to talk to his last girlfriend, had hidden behind his legs at job interviews, had cried when certain teachers spoke too loudly. But something about Adrienne's calm presence seemed to bypass her usual defenses. Is she staying for breakfast? Maya asked quietly. Just for a little while, Caleb replied, stroking her hair. Then she has to go. Okay, Maya snuggled closer. She seems nice. Nice wasn't the word Caleb would have chosen. Dangerous, maybe. Compelling. Terrifying in her absolute certainty, and the casual way she'd dismantled every assumption he'd built about his new job, his father's past, and the supposedly random good fortune that had finally started turning his life around. Adrienne returned with a plate of scrambled eggs, perfectly prepared with cheese melted throughout. She set it on the coffee table along with a glass of orange juice, then settled back onto the couch with her own coffee. What kind of work do you do with my dad? Maya asked between bites, her natural curiosity starting to override her shyness. I help make sure the company runs smoothly, Adrienne said carefully. Your dad is very good at understanding how all our computer systems work together. He's going to help us solve some complicated problems. Dad's really smart, Maya said proudly. He fixed our toaster and our lamp and my music box all by himself. I can tell. Adrienne's smile was genuine. This is a nice home you have here. It wasn't really. The apartment was small and worn, with water stains on the ceiling and a radiator that clanked all winter. But Caleb had done his best. Second-hand furniture arranged carefully, Maya's artwork covering every available wall space, flowers in a jar on the windowsill that he kept alive through sheer stubbornness. Thank you, Caleb said quietly. They finished breakfast in a strange, suspended tension, Maya chattering about school and her upcoming art project, Adrienne asking gentle questions that showed she'd genuinely listened to the details she'd recited earlier, and Caleb watching both of them while his mind churned through impossible calculations. At 7:45, Adrienne checked her phone and stood. I need to go, she said. Maya, it was wonderful meeting you. Keep making that beautiful art, okay? Okay, Maya waved shyly. Will you come back? Maybe someday. Adrienne's eyes flicked to Caleb. If your dad says it's all right. Caleb walked her to the door, leaving Maya to finish her juice. In the privacy of the narrow entryway, Adrienne turned to face him. I know what I'm asking, she said quietly. I know it's unfair and dangerous and possibly insane, but I'm out of options, Caleb. And despite what you think of me right now, I genuinely believe your father would want you to do the right thing, whatever that means to you. Don't use my father to manipulate me. I'm not trying to manipulate you, I'm trying to tell you the truth. Adrienne pulled car keys from her pocket. The USB drive has my personal phone number embedded in the file metadata. If you decide to help, call me. If you don't, I'll understand. She left as quietly as she'd apparently arrived, and Caleb stood in the doorway for a long moment staring at the deadbolt he was absolutely certain he'd engaged the night before. The morning routine was completely destroyed. Maya needed to be at school in 15 minutes, and he still had to shower, dress, pack her lunch, and somehow pretend that the last hour hadn't fundamentally altered the trajectory of his entire life. He found the USB drive still sitting on the coffee table, small and black and impossibly heavy with implications. Caleb picked it up, turned it over in his palm, and shoved it deep into his pocket. Dad? Maya called from the living room. Are we going to be late? No, baby. He forced his voice steady. Get dressed, okay? We're right on schedule. It was a lie. Everything was off schedule now, possibly permanently. But he'd learned long ago that sometimes the most important thing a parent could do was pretend they had everything under control, even when the ground was crumbling beneath their feet. They made it to school with 2 minutes to spare. Maya kissed his cheek and ran toward her classroom, her backpack bouncing, already distracted by friends and the promise of art class later that afternoon. Caleb sat in his car and pulled out the USB drive. He should throw it away, drive straight to work, do his job, collect his paychecks, and build the stable life his daughter desperately needed. Whatever was happening at Voss Global Solutions wasn't his problem. He didn't owe Adrian Voss anything. He didn't even owe Victor Voss anything, no matter what his father had done 2 decades ago. But his father had mortgaged his house for a stranger, had given away money he couldn't afford to lose, for no reason except that someone needed help, and he had the power to provide it. And Caleb had spent the last 3 years learning exactly what it meant to need help that didn't come. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop, hands shaking slightly, and opened the first file. Numbers filled the screen, spreadsheets, transaction logs, account summaries. At first glance, everything looked legitimate. The Voss Foundation donated millions annually to educational programs, medical research, and community development initiatives. The money flowed out in organized, documented streams to recognized nonprofit organizations. But as Caleb started tracing individual transactions backward through their routing paths, he began to see what Adrian had seen. Some of the recipient organizations had addresses that didn't exist, phone numbers that led to disconnected lines, board members whose names appeared on dozens of different charities simultaneously, a red flag for shell companies. And the amounts, while individually small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, added up to millions of dollars over the past 3 years, money leaving the foundation's accounts and disappearing into a network of fake charities that existed only on paper. Caleb's phone rang, startling him. The caller ID showed Voss Global Solutions, Maine. He answered with a dry mouth. "Hello?" "Caleb Mercer," a crisp professional voice. "This is Diane from HR. Mr. Voss would like to see you in his office this morning. Would 10:30 work for your schedule?" The USB drive felt radioactive in his laptop. "Sure, can I ask what this is regarding?" "Just a routine check-in with new senior hires, nothing to worry about." The call ended, and Caleb stared at his reflection in the laptop screen. Victor Voss wanted to see him. The man who had apparently been watching him for 6 years, who had orchestrated his hiring, who either was stealing from his own charity or was about to be exposed as having enabled others to do so. And Caleb had exactly 2 hours to decide what kind of man he was going to be. The kind who protected his own interests and kept his head down, the way any rational person would. Or the kind who mortgaged his house for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. He thought about his father, working late nights at a small accounting firm, driving a car with 200,000 miles on it, living in a house that needed repairs he couldn't afford. A man who had saved someone else's future and never mentioned it, not even to his own son. Caleb closed the laptop and started his car. He had 2 hours. Enough time to get to work early, to look like the eager new employee who was grateful for his opportunity and had no reason to question the man who'd provided it, and enough time to figure out whether he was brave enough or foolish enough to honor a legacy he'd never known existed. The USB drive stayed in his pocket, a small weight that felt heavier with every mile he drove toward Voss Global Solutions, toward Victor Voss's office, toward the moment when he'd have to look the most powerful man in his life in the eye and decide whether to protect the truth or protect himself. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya's school. "Art class going great. Mrs. Patterson says she's making something special for you." Caleb smiled despite everything, because that's what fathers did. They smiled when their children were happy, even when their own worlds were falling apart. And then they figured out how to keep standing, no matter what came next. The Voss Global Solutions Tower rose 43 stories above the city's financial district, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. Caleb had been inside exactly 7 times, 3 interviews, 2 orientation sessions, 1 company gala, and his first week of actual work. Each time he'd felt like an imposter wearing someone else's credentials, waiting for security to realize he didn't belong in a building where the lobby coffee cost more than his grocery budget. Today, parking his 12-year-old sedan between a Tesla and a Mercedes, that feeling intensified into something closer to vertigo. He sat in the parking garage for 10 minutes, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket, running through scenarios that all ended with him losing everything he'd just gained. Victor Voss hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being careless or trusting. If he suspected for even a moment that Caleb had seen the financial records, if Adrian had been followed, if this meeting was actually a trap, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Don't bring it into the building. Security scans everything above the 15th floor." Caleb's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He typed back, Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone who wants you to survive the next 2 hours. Leave it in your car. Lock it in your glove box. Do not access it on any company network. He stared at the messages, then deleted them and powered off his phone. Whoever was texting him, Adrian probably, though he couldn't be certain, was right about one thing. Walking into Victor Voss's office with evidence of financial fraud hidden on his person was a level of stupidity that even desperation couldn't justify. Caleb locked the USB drive in his glove box, buried under insurance paperwork and Maya's forgotten coloring books, and headed for the elevator. The executive floor occupied the top 3 stories of the tower, accessible only by a separate elevator that required both a key card and facial recognition. Caleb had never been up there. His work was confined to the Technical Operations Center on the 23rd floor, a sprawling open space filled with monitors and programmers, and the constant hum of servers processing millions of transactions daily. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never worried about money in their entire life. Original artwork on the walls, furniture that was somehow both minimalist and clearly expensive, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the entire city, spread out like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Mr. Mercer? A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper suit approached him. I'm Diane Chen, VP of Human Resources. Thank you for coming up on such short notice. Of course. Caleb shook her hand, trying to project confidence he absolutely didn't feel. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, mister. Voss just likes to personally check in with senior hires after their first week. It's a tradition of his. Diane gestured toward a hallway lined with photographs. Victor Voss with presidents, CEOs, celebrities, philanthropists. He's running a few minutes behind, so if you'll wait in the small conference room, I'll let you know when he's ready. The small conference room could have held Caleb's entire apartment twice over. He sat at the edge of a table that looked hand-carved from a single piece of wood and tried not to touch anything that might cost more than his annual salary. Through the window, he could see the city where he'd grown up, where his father had lived his entire modest life, where Maya was right now sitting in art class making something special for a father who was possibly about to destroy her stability for the second time in her short life. The door opened and Victor Voss walked in. Caleb had seen him before, of course, at the gala, in company newsletters, in the professional headshots that appeared in business magazines. But there was a difference between seeing someone across a crowded room and being alone with them in a space they controlled absolutely. Victor was 54 years old, still athletic, with gray threading through dark hair and the kind of presence that made people instinctively straighten their posture. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to wonder if he belonged somewhere. Caleb. Victor's handshake was firm, his smile warm and apparently genuine. I'm glad we finally have a chance to talk properly. Please, sit. They sat across from each other and Victor pulled out a tablet, glancing at something before setting it aside. I've been reading your performance reports from your team lead, he said. Marcus says you've already identified 3 security vulnerabilities in our customer data protection systems. In 1 week, that's impressive. I was just doing routine audits, Caleb replied carefully. Standard protocol for new analysts. Standard protocol that the previous analyst missed for 8 months. Victor leaned back in his chair. You have good instincts, Caleb. That's not something that can be taught. Thank you. Your father had good instincts too. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Caleb's throat went dry. I'm sorry? Thomas Mercer. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, genuine emotion breaking through the executive polish. I knew him a long time ago. He was my accountant when I was younger and considerably more foolish. This was the moment. Caleb could play dumb, could pretend Adrian had never told him anything, could let Victor control the narrative completely, or he could take a risk that might reveal exactly how much he already knew. He never mentioned you, Caleb said quietly. Not once. No, he wouldn't have. Victor stood, walking to the window with his hands in his pockets. Your father was a private man, principled in a way that's rare these days. I respected that about him, even when it was inconvenient. Inconvenient how? Victor turned, studying Caleb with an intensity that felt like being scanned by something more than human perception. When I was 31, I made a series of catastrophically bad business decisions. I was young, arrogant, and convinced that intelligence was a substitute for experience. Your father was the accountant who had to explain to me that I was approximately 90 days from complete financial collapse. Caleb said nothing, letting the silence pull more words out of Victor. I expected him to quit. Most people, when they realize their employer's about to crater, get out while they can still add the experience to their resume without the stain of failure. But your father did something different. He took out a second mortgage on his house and gave me the money to cover my debts. Why would he do that? I asked him the same thing. Victor's voice softened slightly. He said he'd been young and stupid once too, and someone had helped him when they didn't have to, and this was him passing it forward. He made me promise two things: that I'd never tell anyone what he'd done, and that I'd help someone else the same way if I ever got the chance. Did you? The question came out harder than Caleb intended. Help someone else? I've tried. Victor returned to his seat, his gaze never leaving Caleb's face. I've donated hundreds of millions to educational programs, business incubators, startup funds for people who have the talent but not the capital. But it's not the same, is it? Writing a check from a foundation account isn't the same as risking your family's home for a stranger. No, Caleb agreed. It's not. Your father saved my life, Caleb. Everything I've built started with the second chance he gave me. And when he got sick, when he was dying from cancer and drowning in medical debt, I wanted to help him. I tried to help him. Victor's jaw tightened. He refused every offer, every attempt to repay what he'd done. He said his son was proud, and that you'd built your own life through your own work, and he didn't want me anywhere near you. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. He was protecting me. From what? I never understood. From feeling obligated to someone you'd never met? From knowing that your father had sacrificed more than you realized? Victor shook his head. But I honored his wishes. I stayed away from his funeral. I watched from a distance. And when you applied here 2 months ago, I saw it as an opportunity to keep the promise I'd made him. To help someone else. To help you. Victor's voice carried absolute conviction. Not charity, Caleb. You earned your position here through your qualifications and your performance in the interviews. But I made sure you had the opportunity to compete fairly for a job you were being overlooked for because of a 3-year gap in your employment history that had nothing to do with your abilities. It was a good story. Compelling, emotional, perfectly calibrated to explain everything Adrienne had told him while casting Victor as the honorable man repaying an old debt. And maybe it was even true. But it didn't explain the money disappearing from the foundation accounts. Why are you telling me this now? Caleb asked. Because I want you to understand that you belong here, that this isn't a favor or a handout. Your father gave me something I could never truly repay, but I can make sure his son has the opportunities he deserves. Victor paused. And because I want you to know that you can trust me, Caleb. If you ever need anything, advice, support, help with your daughter, I meant what I said at the gala. This company takes care of its people. The mention of Maya sent warning bells through Caleb's mind. How much did Victor actually know about his life? How closely had he been watching? I appreciate that, Caleb said carefully. Maya and I are doing fine, but thank you. I'm glad to hear it. Victor glanced at his tablet again. I don't want to keep you from your work, but there is one other thing I wanted to discuss. We're expanding the security audit team, and I'd like you to take the lead on reviewing our foundation's financial systems. Caleb's heart stopped. The foundation? He managed. We process hundreds of millions in donations and grants annually. It's critical infrastructure, but it hasn't had a comprehensive security review in 2 years. Your background in financial systems analysis makes you perfect for the project. Victor smiled. It would be a significant increase in visibility and responsibility, the kind of project that leads to promotions. It was a test. It had to be a test. Either Victor knew that Adrienne had shown Caleb the records and was setting a trap, or he genuinely had no idea about the fraud and was accidentally putting Caleb in the perfect position to expose it. That sounds like an important project, Caleb said slowly. When would you need me to start? Next week. I'll have Diane send you the details. Victor stood, extending his hand again. Your father would be proud of you, Caleb. I hope you know that. The handshake felt like sealing a contract Caleb hadn't fully read. He left the executive floor in a daze, his mind spinning through implications and possibilities. If Victor was innocent, then someone else at the company was using the foundation as a personal bank account and carefully keeping it hidden from the CEO. If Victor was guilty, then he'd just handed Caleb enough rope to either hang himself or expose the entire operation. Either way, Caleb was now in the center of something much larger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. His phone buzzed the moment he stepped off the elevator. Another text from the unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight, 8 p.m. Anderson Park, South Entrance." Caleb deleted the message and headed back to his desk, where a stack of legitimate work waited. Security protocols to review, system logs to audit, the normal responsibilities of someone who desperately needed to keep his job and not get involved in corporate fraud investigations. He made it through exactly 45 minutes before his team lead, Marcus Chen, appeared at his workspace. "Mercer, got a minute?" Marcus was in his early 40s, competent and generally fair, with the slightly haunted look of someone who'd been in middle management long enough to know better but not long enough to escape. He led Caleb to a small meeting room and closed the door. "How did your meeting with Voss go?" Marcus asked. "Fine. He offered me a new project auditing the Foundation's systems." Marcus's expression flickered with something Caleb couldn't quite read. "Yeah, I heard. That's a big opportunity." "You don't sound excited about it." "I'm not the one who needs to be excited." Marcus pulled out his laptop, typing quickly before turning it around to show Caleb a series of personnel files. Last 3 people who did Foundation audits. David Richardson, promoted to VP level within 18 months. Sarah Chen, now running our Asia-Pacific operations. Michael Torres, currently CFO of a Fortune 500 company. So it's a good career move. It's a golden ticket if you do it right. Marcus closed the laptop. It's also a political minefield. The Foundation is Victor's personal passion project. His wife chairs the board. Half the board members are major investors in the company. You'll be auditing the financial decisions of people who could destroy your career with a phone call. What are you trying to tell me, Marcus? I'm telling you that when powerful people ask you to look at their books, sometimes they want you to find problems, and sometimes they want you to confirm there aren't any. And you need to figure out which situation you're in before you start digging. Caleb leaned back in his chair. What would you do? Honestly, Marcus met his eyes. I do the audit professionally, document everything meticulously, and report exactly what I found through proper channels. But I've been here long enough to have job security and a network of allies. You're 1 week in, raising a kid alone, and apparently important enough that the CEO personally requested you for this. So what I do and what you should do might be very different things. It was the most honest advice Caleb had received since this entire situation started, which made it both valuable and terrifying. Thanks, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. Just be careful, okay? Companies like this, they eat people who forget that survival sometimes matters more than being right. Caleb returned to his desk, Marcus's words echoing in his mind. Survival sometimes matters more than being right. It was practical advice, rational advice, the kind of advice his father might have given him if he were still alive. Except his father had mortgaged his house for a stranger because it was the right thing to do, not because it was safe. The afternoon crawled past in a blur of code reviews and security protocols. At 4:30, Caleb's phone rang. Maya's school. Mr. Mercer, this is Principal Davidson. Maya's fine, but there was a small incident at pickup time. Caleb's blood ran cold. What kind of incident? A woman tried to pick her up, claiming to be her aunt. Maya didn't recognize her, and our staff followed protocol and refused release. The woman left when we threatened to call the police, but I wanted to make you aware. What did she look like? Mid-30s, dark hair, well-dressed. She had identification that said her name was Anne Vaughn. Not Adrienne, but close enough to be deliberate. I'm coming to get her right now, Caleb said, already grabbing his keys. Don't let her leave with anyone except me. He broke at least 3 traffic laws getting to the school. Maya was waiting in the office, clutching her elephant, looking small and scared in a way that made Caleb's protective instincts flare into something close to rage. Hey, baby. He scooped her up, checking her over, even though the principal had said she was fine. You okay? I didn't know her, Daddy. I said I didn't know her. And Mrs. Patterson said I was very smart to tell the truth. You were perfect. Caleb held her tight. You did exactly right. Principal Davidson walked over, her expression grave. We've already filed a report with the police. Our security cameras captured the woman's vehicle, a black Mercedes with tinted windows, no license plate visible. Thank you. Caleb's voice was steady despite the fury building in his chest. Is there anything else I need to do? We've flagged your daughter's file. No one except you will be permitted to pick her up without prior written authorization and photo ID verification. And Mr. Mercer? She paused. If you're dealing with a custody situation or any kind of domestic issue, we have resources that can help. It's not that, Caleb said, because it wasn't, not in any conventional sense. But I appreciate the offer. He got Maya home and made her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with cut-up hot dogs. Nothing fancy but familiar and safe. She was quiet through the meal, processing the afternoon's fear in the way children did, with periodic questions that revealed more anxiety than her calm exterior suggested. Why did that lady say she was my aunt? I don't know, baby. Am I in trouble? No, you're not in trouble. You're safe. And you did everything right. Is she going to come back? That was the question Caleb couldn't answer honestly without terrifying her. I won't let anyone hurt you, Maya. That's a promise. After dinner, after stories and reassurances, and tucking her in with extra nightlights, Caleb sat in the living room staring at the clock. 7:15 p.m. The meeting at Anderson Park was in 45 minutes. Someone had tried to grab his daughter. Not successfully, not violently, but deliberately. A message or a threat or a test of his vulnerabilities. And the timing, less than 12 hours after Adrienne's visit and Victor's meeting, couldn't possibly be coincidental. He should call the police, tell them everything, the break-in, the financial records, the attempted pickup, all of it. Let professionals handle whatever criminal conspiracy was unfolding around him. But if he did that, Victor would know. And if Victor was guilty, Caleb would lose his job before the investigation even started. And if Victor was innocent but felt betrayed, the result would be exactly the same. At 7:45 p.m., Caleb called his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who'd helped watch Maya occasionally when Caleb's previous job had required late hours. Elena, I know it's last minute, but could you possibly sit with Maya for an hour? I have an emergency work situation. Of course, mijo. Give me 5 minutes. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with her knitting and a kind smile, settling into Caleb's living room like she'd done it 100 times. Caleb checked on Maya one more time, fast asleep, elephant tucked under her chin, and headed out into the night. Anderson Park was 20 minutes away, a sprawling green space that was pleasant during the day and vaguely threatening after dark. The south entrance was poorly lit, bordered by trees that created shadows deep enough to hide anything. Caleb parked under a streetlight and waited, checking his mirrors every few seconds, his hand on his phone ready to call for help. At exactly 8 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows. Not Adrian. A man in his 60s, lean and precise, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in a public park at night. He walked directly to Caleb's passenger door and tapped on the window. Against every survival instinct he possessed, Caleb unlocked the door. The man slid into the passenger seat with practiced ease, pulling the door shut and immediately checking the mirrors the same way Caleb had been doing. My name is Robert Huang, he said without preamble. I'm the general counsel for Voss Global Solutions, and I've been investigating financial irregularities in the company's foundation for the past 8 months. Adrienne Voss came to me 6 weeks ago with preliminary evidence, and I've been trying to build a case that won't destroy the company in the process. Caleb stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because Victor just handed you the foundation audit, which means either he's phenomenally stupid or he knows exactly what you're going to find and wants to control how you find it. Huang pulled out a phone, not his regular phone, Caleb noticed, but a burner device. Someone tried to grab your daughter this afternoon. That wasn't random. That was a warning. From who? I don't know yet, but there are at least 3 people with access to foundation accounts who have the means and motive to steal millions, and all of them are smart enough to cover their tracks. Huang pulled up a series of photographs on the phone. Financial executives, board members, people Caleb had seen at the company gala. Any of them could have orchestrated the fraud. Any of them could be watching you right now. Then why am I sitting in a park with you instead of in protective custody? Because protective custody requires a formal investigation, which requires evidence, which requires someone to access the Foundation's systems and pull transaction records that are currently locked behind security protocols I can't breach without triggering alerts. Huang's eyes were hard. You're a senior systems analyst with legitimate access. You can pull those records as part of your assigned audit. And if you do it right, no one will know what you're actually looking for until it's too late for them to destroy the evidence. Caleb laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. You want me to commit corporate espionage? I want you to do your job thoroughly. And when you find evidence of criminal activity, I want you to document it properly and bring it to me instead of going to Victor, the board, or anyone else who might be involved. And if I say no, then I keep investigating on my own, which will take months and probably fail because I don't have access to the data I need. The fraud continues. Whoever tried to grab your daughter tries again, possibly more successfully. And you spend the rest of your career wondering if you could have stopped something if you'd been brave enough to try. Huang opened the car door. Adrian trusted you enough to show you the evidence. I'm trusting you enough to give you a way to do something about it. The rest is up to you. He was gone before Caleb could respond, melting back into the shadows with the same precision he'd emerged from them. Caleb sat alone in his car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez. Maya woke up asking for you. Everything okay? He drove home faster than he should have, his mind churning through impossible choices. Mrs. Rodriguez met him at the door, concern creasing her face. That child was having nightmares, she said quietly, about someone taking her away from you. Thank you for staying with her, Elena. Caleb, she put a hand on his arm. Whatever is happening, whatever you're involved in, be careful. That little girl needs her father. He found Maya curled in her bed, tears drying on her cheeks. He climbed in beside her, pulling her close, and felt her relax immediately against him. You came back, she whispered. I'll always come back, baby. Always. Promise? I promise. It was a promise he might not be able to keep, and that knowledge sat like lead in his chest, because the choice in front of him was becoming clearer and more terrible with each passing hour. He could protect Maya's immediate safety by walking away from all of this, quit the job, move to a different city, disappear into a quieter life where billion-dollar conspiracies didn't reach. Or he could protect her future by being the kind of father who stood up when something was wrong, who didn't let fear turn him into someone who looked the other way, while people stole from charities meant to help others. His father had mortgaged his house for a stranger, had given away security his family needed because someone else needed it more. And Caleb finally understood what that meant. It wasn't about being noble or heroic. It was about looking in the mirror and recognizing the person staring back. It was about raising a daughter who would someday face her own impossible choices and remembering that children learned more from what their parents did than what they said. Maya fell back asleep against his chest, her breathing evening out into the deep rhythm of childhood rest. Caleb stayed awake, watching streetlight patterns move across her ceiling, thinking about his father and Victor Voss and Adrienne and the USB drive locked in his car and the audit he'd been assigned and the daughter whose entire world depended on the decision he made in the next few hours. At 11:30 p.m., he carefully extracted himself from Maya's bed and walked to his laptop. He opened a secure browser and started mapping out the Foundation's network architecture, identifying access points and security protocols and data storage systems. If he was going to do this, he needed to do it right, professionally, with enough documentation that whatever he found would hold up under legal scrutiny. His phone buzzed one more time. Another text from the unknown number, thank you. Caleb didn't respond. He just kept working, building a plan that would either expose a multi-million-dollar fraud or destroy the fragile stability he'd only just regained. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rotation, full of people sleeping soundly in beds they didn't have to worry about losing, raising children they didn't have to protect from corporate conspiracies, living lives that weren't balanced on the knife edge of impossible choices. Caleb envied them, and then he got back to work. The Foundation audit officially began on a Tuesday morning that felt like walking into a room wired with explosives. Caleb arrived at the office an hour early, his security badge granting him access to systems he'd spent the previous 3 days mapping in careful detail. Robert Huang had been right about one thing. Legitimate access was camouflage. As long as Caleb appeared to be doing exactly what Victor had assigned him to do, no one would question why he was pulling financial records dating back 5 years. The question was whether anyone would notice what he was actually looking for. Marcus had set him up in a small conference room on the 26th floor, away from the main technical operations center. Privacy, Marcus had explained, for sensitive financial work. But Caleb understood it also meant isolation. No witnesses to what he found. No colleagues to casually consult if something looked wrong. He spread his materials across the table with deliberate precision. Official audit protocols printed from the company's internal wiki. A fresh legal pad for handwritten notes. 3 monitors connected to his laptop, displaying different layers of the foundation's financial architecture. To anyone walking past, it looked exactly like a senior analyst conducting a thorough security review. Caleb started with the easy part: transaction volume analysis, user access logs, system security patches. Baseline work that established his presence in the data and created a paper trail of legitimate research. He documented everything: timestamps and file names and query parameters, building a record that would prove he'd followed proper procedures. By noon, he'd confirmed what Adrian's USB drive had shown him. The Voss Foundation processed approximately $200 million annually through various charitable programs. 97% of that money went exactly where it was supposed to go: educational grants, medical research, community development initiatives. The transactions were clean, well-documented, and entirely legitimate. But 3%, roughly $6 million per year, disappeared into a network of recipient organizations that existed only on paper. Caleb pulled up the registration documents for Cascade Educational Partners, supposedly a nonprofit supporting literacy programs in underserved communities. The address listed was a UPS store in Delaware. The board of directors consisted of 5 people whose names appeared on dozens of other charitable organizations, none of which had functioning websites or phone numbers. The tax filings showed minimal operational expenses and vague descriptions of program activities. It was a shell company, sophisticated enough to pass casual inspection, but completely hollow underneath. He found 11 more just like it. Horizon Youth Services, Summit Community Development, Clearwater Health Initiative, all registered in states with minimal nonprofit oversight, all sharing board members with each other, all receiving quarterly transfers from the Voss Foundation that collectively added up to millions. The money came in from legitimate donors, passed through the foundation's accounts, and flowed out to organizations that didn't actually do anything except exist on paper and accept wire transfers. Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from Maya's school, a photo from her art teacher showing the project she'd been working on, a painted portrait of Caleb holding her hand, both of them smiling under a bright sun. The caption read, "Family Love" by Maya Mercer. He stared at the image for a long moment, his daughter's careful brushstrokes, depicting a world where fathers and daughters were safe and happy and uncomplicated. Then he saved the photo and went back to documenting fraud. The door opened without warning. Caleb's hand instinctively moved to minimize his screens, but he caught himself. Appearing guilty would be worse than appearing thorough. Diane Chen walked in carrying a folder and a coffee that smelled expensive. "How's the audit going?" she asked pleasantly. Systematically, Caleb gestured at his monitors. "I'm working through transaction patterns right now. Security protocols look solid, but I'm finding some irregularities in recipient verification processes." "Irregularities?" Diane's tone sharpened slightly. "Nothing alarming yet, just some organizations with incomplete contact information in our database. I'll need to verify them against state registration records." Caleb kept his voice professionally neutral. "Standard audit practice." Diane set the folder on the table. "Victor wanted me to give you this. Background information on our major foundation partners. It might help with your verification process." Caleb opened the folder. Inside were glossy brochures and annual reports for legitimate organizations, the kind with real addresses, functioning programs, and measurable impact metrics. Not a single one of the shell companies appeared in the materials. "This is helpful," he said. "Thank you. We're very proud of the Foundation's work." Diane's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Victor takes it personally when people question the integrity of our charitable giving. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't not a threat either. After she left, Caleb sat motionless for several minutes, processing the interaction. Diane had appeared too quickly after he'd mentioned irregularities, which meant either she was monitoring his work directly, or someone was reporting to her, or the conference room was under surveillance he hadn't detected. He pulled out his phone and texted the unknown number. "How closely am I being watched?" The response came within seconds. "Assume everything in that building is monitored. Don't access anything sensitive from company devices. Continue the official audit exactly as assigned." Caleb deleted the exchange and returned to his work, this time being meticulously careful about what he documented where. His official audit notes remained professional and thorough, but vague. The real evidence, screenshots, transaction traces, organizational links, he saved to an encrypted partition on a personal thumb drive that never left his pocket. By late afternoon, he'd identified a pattern in how the shell companies operated. Money transferred from the foundation on a quarterly schedule, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic fraud detection alerts. The timing coincided with board meetings, when large batches of charitable grants were approved en masse. Individual transactions were small enough to be overlooked in the context of hundreds of legitimate grants being processed simultaneously. It was elegant, really. Whoever had designed this system understood financial controls well enough to work around them systematically. Caleb was so focused on tracing a particularly complex money flow that he didn't hear the door open again until someone spoke directly behind him. "Finding anything interesting?" He spun in his chair. Victor Voss stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, expression casually curious. "Just standard anomalies," Caleb managed, his heart rate spiking. "Nothing that suggests security vulnerabilities yet." Victor walked closer, glancing at the monitors. Caleb had been careful. The screen showed legitimate foundation partners, transaction summaries that looked normal, nothing that screamed criminal investigation. "You're being very thorough," Victor observed. "You asked for comprehensive. I'm trying to deliver comprehensive." "I appreciate that." Victor pulled out a chair and sat down, uninvited but completely comfortable. "Can I ask you something, Caleb? Off the record?" Every instinct Caleb had screamed danger. "Of course. When you look at these financial systems, these millions of dollars moving through charitable programs, what do you see?" It was a test. It had to be a test. "I see impressive scale," Caleb said carefully, "and I see complexity that requires robust controls to manage effectively." "That's the analyst answer." Victor leaned forward slightly. "What do you see as a father, as someone who knows what it's like to need help and not have access to it?" Caleb met his eyes, trying to read the man across from him. Was this genuine philosophical curiosity, a manipulation tactic, an attempt to build trust before springing a trap? "I see opportunity," he said quietly. "For people like me, like my daughter, to get the kind of support that changes outcomes. Educational programs that make college possible, medical research that saves lives, community development that builds futures." He paused. "And I see the responsibility to make sure that money actually reaches the people it's supposed to help." Something flickered across Victor's face. Approval, maybe, or calculation. "Your father understood that responsibility," Victor said. "He didn't help me because he expected anything in return. He helped me because someone needed help, and he had the power to provide it." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. "I've tried to build that same principle into everything this company does. The foundation isn't about tax breaks or public relations. It's about actually making a difference." "I can see that in the numbers," Caleb offered. "Can you?" Victor turned back to him. "Because what I need from you, Caleb, is absolute honesty. If you find problems in these systems, if money is going where it shouldn't or not going where it should, I need to know. Not a sanitized report that protects people's feelings. The truth." It was the perfect opening. Caleb could tell him right now, show him the shell companies, the suspicious patterns, the millions disappearing into organizations that didn't exist. Let Victor be the one to decide what to do with the information. But Robert Huang's warning echoed in his mind. Either Victor knows exactly what you're going to find, or he's phenomenally stupid. "You'll get the truth," Caleb said. "I promise you that." "Good." Victor headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. I heard about the incident at Maya's school. Someone trying to pick her up?" Caleb's blood went cold. "How did you know about that?" I have a daughter too, grown now, but I remember what it was like to worry about her safety. Victor's expression softened into something that looked genuinely paternal. If you're having any kind of custody issues or security concerns, the company has resources. Private investigators, legal support, whatever you need. It was a misunderstanding, Caleb lied. Already resolved. I'm glad to hear it, but the offer stands. Victor left, and the conference room felt suddenly larger and colder. Caleb waited exactly 5 minutes before pulling out his personal phone and typing, "He knows about Maya, about the school." The response, "Of course he does. The question is whether he arranged it or is just monitoring you. Keep working. We're running out of time." The rest of the week passed in a blur of careful documentation and mounting tension. Caleb continued his official audit during business hours, pulling reports and verifying security protocols and writing professionally vague summaries of his findings. After Maya went to bed each night, he worked on the real investigation, mapping money flows, identifying shell company connections, building a timeline of fraudulent transactions that stretched back 4 years and totaled more than $24 million. The pattern became clearer the deeper he dug. The fraud had started small, a few $100,000 in the first year, easy to dismiss as accounting errors or administrative overhead. But it had grown steadily, becoming more sophisticated and more brazen as whoever was running it gained confidence that they wouldn't be caught. On Thursday evening, Caleb met Robert Huang again, this time in a parking garage downtown, sitting in Huang's car with the engine running for noise cover. "I've identified at least 15 shell organizations," Caleb said, handing over a USB drive with encrypted copies of everything he'd found. "Total diversion of funds is approximately $24 million over 4 years. The transactions are timed to coincide with board meetings when large grant batches are approved. Whoever set this up has intimate knowledge of the foundation's approval processes and internal controls." Huang plugged the drive into a laptop, reviewing the data with the focused intensity of a prosecutor building a case. "This is solid work," he said finally. "This could actually hold up in court, but we have a problem." "Just one?" "The shell companies all trace back to a single registered agent service in Delaware. The actual beneficial owners are hidden behind multiple layers of corporate entities. Without subpoena power, I can't identify who's actually receiving the money. So we can prove money is disappearing but not where it's going? Or who's taking it?" Huang closed the laptop. "Which means we need to force them to make a mistake. Get them to move money in a way that exposes their identity." Caleb didn't like where this was going. "How?" "Your official audit report is due to Victor next week. What are you planning to include?" "The truth. The shell companies, the suspicious transactions, all of it." "That's one option." Huang leaned back in his seat. "Or you could submit a report that says everything looks fine, no red flags. Foundation security protocols are solid, and all recipient organizations have been verified as legitimate." "You want me to lie?" "I want you to set a trap." Huang's eyes were hard. "If you report the fraud officially, whoever's running it will immediately start covering their tracks. They'll destroy evidence, dissolve the shell companies, and will never prove who was actually involved. But if you give them a clean audit report, they'll think they're safe. They'll continue operating. And the next quarterly transfer, which happens in 2 weeks, will give us a chance to trace the money in real time." Caleb shook his head. "If I submit a false report and this goes to court, my credibility is destroyed. Everything I found becomes questionable because I lied in an official document. Only if we fail." Huang pulled out a notarized affidavit. "This is a sworn statement from me, acknowledging that I instructed you to submit a misleading preliminary report as part of an ongoing investigation. It's dated yesterday and has been filed with my personal attorney. If this goes wrong, it protects you legally. And if it goes right, then we catch them in the act, identify who's actually stealing the money, and have enough evidence to prosecute. The foundation gets its money back, the company's reputation is protected, and you become the analyst who exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud." It was logical, strategic, and it required Caleb to do exactly what every instinct told him was wrong. Lie to the man who'd hired him, hide evidence of a crime, and trust that a lawyer he barely knew would protect him if everything fell apart. "I need to think about it," Caleb said. "You have until Monday. That's when Victor expects your preliminary report." Huang ejected the USB drive and handed it back. Whatever you decide, destroy this copy. Keep the original somewhere safe that's not your home or office. And Caleb, if you choose to tell Victor the truth, make sure you do it somewhere public with witnesses, just in case. The warning was clear enough. Huang wasn't certain whether Victor was innocent or guilty, which meant Caleb was potentially putting himself in danger either way. He drove home through Friday night traffic, his mind churning through scenarios and outcomes. Maya was already asleep when he arrived. Mrs. Rodriguez had stayed late again, refusing payment but accepting the groceries Caleb had started buying her as quiet thanks. "That child asked about her mother tonight," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly as she gathered her things. "First time in months. She wanted to know if her mother would be proud of her art project." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that mothers always watch over their children and that hers would be very proud." The elderly woman touched his arm. "But she needs to hear it from you too, mijo. Children at that age, they need to know their parents see them." After she left, Caleb sat in Maya's doorway watching his daughter sleep. Her art supplies scattered across her desk, her latest painting propped against her lamp, another portrait of them together, this one with more detail, more care, more evidence of the talent her teacher kept praising. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, different from the one Adrienne had been using. "Your daughter is very talented. It would be a shame if anything interrupted her education." Caleb's hands shook as he read it again. It wasn't explicitly a threat, but the implication was crystal clear. He checked every window lock, the door chain, the security latch he'd installed on Maya's window after the school incident. Then he sat on the couch with a baseball bat across his lap and didn't sleep until dawn started filtering through the blinds. Saturday morning, Maya woke cheerful and oblivious, excited about a birthday party that afternoon. Caleb took her shopping for a present, helped her pick out a card, and spent the whole time scanning faces in the store for anyone who might be watching them. The party was at a trampoline park, chaotic and loud and full of screaming children. Caleb positioned himself where he could see all the entrances and kept his phone in his hand the entire time. When Maya waved at him from across the foam pit, laughing with her friends, he waved back and felt something crack in his chest. She deserved this. Normalcy. Joy. A childhood that wasn't overshadowed by her father's fear and the weight of impossible choices. That night, after Maya was asleep, Caleb pulled out the USB drive and reviewed everything one more time. The evidence was solid. The pattern was clear. $24 million had been systematically stolen from charitable programs meant to help people who needed it most. His father had mortgaged his house to help a stranger, had sacrificed his family's financial security because someone needed help, and he had the power to provide it. Caleb thought about what his father would do in this situation, and he realized with absolute certainty that Thomas Mercer would never submit a false report, no matter how strategically sound the reasoning. Because integrity wasn't something you suspended when it became inconvenient. It was exactly what you held on to when the cost of maintaining it became real. Sunday morning, Caleb started writing his official audit report. Not the sanitized version that would set a trap. Not the lie that might catch criminals, but would compromise everything he believed about doing things the right way. The truth. Documented, detailed, and damning. He included screenshots of the suspicious organizations, transaction patterns that highlighted the systematic diversion of funds, analysis of the timing that proved deliberate coordination, and recommendations for immediate investigation by both internal audit and external authorities. It was professional, thorough, and would absolutely destroy any chance of catching the criminals in the act the way Huang wanted. But it was honest, and it was right. At 11 p.m. Sunday night, Caleb received a call from Adrienne. "Don't submit that report," she said without preamble. "You've been reading my drafts? Huang has access to your work computer. He called me an hour ago panicking." Adrienne's voice was tight with stress. "Caleb, if you submit that tomorrow, you're going to force everyone's hand before we're ready. People will start covering tracks, destroying evidence." "I'm not submitting a false report," Caleb interrupted. "I won't compromise the investigation by lying in an official document." "Then you're compromising it by being naive." Adrienne's composure cracked. "These aren't people who play by rules or care about integrity. They've stolen millions, they tried to grab your daughter, and they will destroy you if you give them the chance. You need to be smarter than this." "My father wasn't smart. He was honest, and that mattered more." Your father is dead, Caleb. And you have a daughter who needs you alive and employed and not caught in the crossfire of a corporate war. Adrian's voice softened. Please, just give us 2 more weeks. Let Huang set the trap. Then you can be as honest as you want after we've caught them. No. The word came out firmer than Caleb expected. I'm sorry, Adrian, but I'm doing this the right way, even if it's not the smart way. He hung up before she could argue further. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Caleb dressed carefully, double-checked that his report was saved to multiple secure locations, and made Maya's favorite breakfast. Big day at work? She asked, sensing his tension. Important day, he confirmed. But I'll be home for dinner. Promise. Pinky promise? He linked his pinky with hers. Pinky promise. The drive to Voss Global Solutions felt like driving toward a cliff edge. Caleb parked in his usual spot, checked his mirrors obsessively, and walked into the building carrying a report that would either expose a massive fraud or end his career spectacularly. Marcus was waiting at his desk. Victor wants the preliminary report by noon, he said. He's got board members flying in this afternoon for an emergency meeting. Emergency meeting about what? Marcus lowered his voice. Rumor is someone leaked information about foundation irregularities to the SEC. The board is preemptively launching an internal investigation to get ahead of any regulatory scrutiny. Caleb's heart sank. Someone had moved first, which meant his report was about to land in the middle of a situation that was already escalating beyond anyone's control. Is Victor in his office? Caleb asked. All morning. Why? Because I need to deliver this report in person. Marcus studied him with the kind of careful assessment that came from years of navigating corporate politics. Are you about to do something brave or something stupid? Honestly, I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. Caleb took the elevator to the executive floor, his report printed and bound in a professional folder, his hands steady despite the fear running through his veins. Diane Chen intercepted him at reception. Mr. Voss is in meetings all morning, she said smoothly. This is the Foundation audit report. He asked for it by noon. Something flickered across Diane's face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. I can deliver it to him. I prefer to present it directly. He specifically asked me to be thorough and honest. I owe him both. They stared at each other for a long moment, 2 people in a power dynamic that wasn't quite adversarial, but definitely wasn't collaborative. Wait here, Diane said finally. She disappeared into Victor's office. Voices rose briefly, muffled but intense. Then the door opened and Victor stood there himself, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who'd been dealing with crisis management since dawn. Caleb, come in. The office was exactly what Caleb expected. Massive windows, expensive furniture, walls covered with awards and photographs documenting Victor's rise from the failure his father had saved to the billionaire CEO he'd become. I understand you have my report, Victor said, closing the door. Caleb handed him the folder. Preliminary findings. You asked for honesty. This is what I found. Victor opened it, his eyes scanning the first page. Then the second. His expression didn't change, but something tightened around his jaw. These organizations, he said quietly, you're saying they don't exist? They exist on paper, but they're shell companies. No operational programs, no measurable impact, no legitimate charitable activity. They exist solely to receive money from the foundation. How much money? Approximately $24 million over 4 years. Victor set the report down carefully, his hands completely steady. Who else has seen this? Just you. The raw data is encrypted and secured. I documented everything according to proper audit protocols. And you're certain about these findings? I've triple-checked the analysis. The pattern is deliberate and systematic. Someone with intimate knowledge of foundation operations set this up and has been running it for years. Victor walked to his window, staring out at the city his company helped shape. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but carrying an undercurrent of something harder to name. 23 years ago, your father saved my life. He gave me everything he had because I needed help, and he had the power to provide it. And when I tried to repay him, he made me promise to pass that gift forward, to help other people the way he'd helped me. Victor turned back to Caleb. I've spent 2 decades trying to honor that promise. The foundation is my attempt to make his sacrifice mean something beyond just my own success. I know that, Caleb said quietly. And now you're telling me that someone has been stealing from it. Taking money meant for people who actually need help and funneling it into their own pockets. Victor's composure finally cracked slightly.
Do you have any idea who? Not yet. The ownership structure is deliberately obscured, but whoever it is has access to foundation approval processes and knows how to work around internal controls. Someone on my board, or my executive team, or both. Victor sat down heavily in his chair. How long until this becomes public? There's already talk of an SEC investigation. Whether that's connected or coincidental, I can't say. It's not coincidental.
Victor pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. Someone knew this was coming and tried to get ahead of it by going to regulators first, which means they either want to control the narrative or they're trying to force my hand before I can conduct a proper internal investigation. He looked up at Caleb with an expression that was part respect, part resignation. You could have buried this, submitted a clean report, let me think everything was fine. It would have been easier for you. Easier isn't the same as right. No, it's not. Victor stood, extending his hand. Your father would be proud of you, Caleb. I know that doesn't mean much coming from me right now, but it's true. They shook hands, and Caleb felt the full weight of what he'd just done settle over him. He'd told the truth, exposed the fraud, done exactly what his father would have done, and now he had absolutely no idea what would happen next. Victor made 3 phone calls before Caleb left his office. The first was to his head of security, requesting immediate surveillance footage review from the Foundation offices. The second was to Robert Huang, summoning him with a tone that suggested the General Counsel's comfortable Monday morning was about to become considerably less comfortable. The third was to someone Victor didn't name, speaking in clipped sentences about containment and timing and board management. Caleb stood near the window, trying to give the illusion of privacy, while catching enough fragments to understand that whatever he'd just set in motion was accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. I need you to stay available today, Victor said after ending the last call. The board meeting is at 3. I want you there to present your findings directly. To the entire board? To the people who approved every fraudulent grant over the past 4 years, yes. But Victor's expression was unreadable. Either they're complicit or they're incompetent. Either way, they need to hear this from the analyst who uncovered it, not filtered through my interpretation. It wasn't a request. Caleb nodded, his stomach tightening at the prospect of presenting evidence of multi-million-dollar fraud to the same people who might have orchestrated it. One more thing, Victor added as Caleb reached the door. Your family. Do you have somewhere safe they could stay for a few days, just as a precaution? The careful phrasing didn't hide the implication. You think someone might come after Maya again? I think we're about to corner people who've already demonstrated they're willing to threaten children. I'd rather be overcautious than have regrets. Caleb's phone felt heavy in his pocket, loaded with misses. Rodriguez's number and the contact information for Maya's school, and the creeping realization that doing the right thing had just painted a target on his daughter's back. I'll take care of it, he said quietly. The morning dissolved into a blur of crisis management that Caleb only partially understood. He returned to his desk to find Marcus already packing up his monitors. You're being relocated, Marcus said without preamble. Conference room next to Victor's office. Security escort starting in 10 minutes. What the hell did you find in that audit? Enough to matter. Yeah, I got that from the 3 executives who've already been escorted out of the building by armed security. Marcus lowered his voice. Caleb, be very careful who you trust right now. When this much money is involved, people do things that don't make sense until afterward. Speaking from experience? Speaking from survival. Marcus handed him a flash drive. Backup of all your work files. Keep it somewhere that's not here and not your apartment, just in case. Caleb pocketed the drive, grateful for the practical paranoia of someone who'd navigated corporate warfare long enough to develop good instincts. Thank you. Don't thank me until you're still employed this time next week. The security escort turned out to be 2 men in suits who looked less like corporate security and more like people who'd had very different careers before entering the private sector. They flanked Caleb politely but firmly as he moved his materials to the executive floor, their presence attracting stares and whispered speculation from everyone they passed. The new conference room had windows overlooking the city and a door that locked from the inside. One of the security guards positioned himself outside, while the other swept the room with a device that Caleb belatedly realized was checking for surveillance equipment. "You're clear," the guard said. "Don't open this door for anyone except Mr. Voss or Mr. Huang. Anyone else tries to enter, you hit this." He handed Caleb a small panic button that looked deceptively simple. "We'll be here in under 30 seconds. After they left, Caleb stood alone in a room that was probably larger than his entire apartment, looking at the city where his daughter was currently in school, protected by teachers who thought the biggest threat to her safety was whether she'd remember to wear a jacket at recess. He called Mrs. Rodriguez. "Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not ask me why right now." "What is it, mijo?" "Could Maya stay with you for a few days, starting today? I'll pay you, bring all her things, explain everything to her school." "Of course she can stay." "But Caleb, what's happening?" "I did something at work that was right but not safe, and I need to know she's somewhere that isn't connected to me until I know it's over." There was a long pause, then, "I'll pick her up from school myself. Does she need anything special?" "Her elephant, the stuffed one she sleeps with, and her art supplies if there's room." Caleb's voice cracked slightly. "And could you tell her that her dad loves her and this isn't forever?" "She knows that, Caleb. That child knows she's loved. But yes, I'll tell her." He ended the call and immediately texted Maya's school, authorizing Mrs. Rodriguez for pickup with the special code phrase the principal had established after the previous incident. Then he sat down at the conference table and tried to stop his hands from shaking. Robert Huang arrived 20 minutes later, looking significantly less composed than he had during their parking garage meetings. He dropped a briefcase on the table and stared at Caleb with an expression caught between admiration and fury. "You submitted the real report." "I told you I was going to." "I told you not to. I gave you a legal cover to wait, to set a trap that would actually catch the people responsible, instead of just exposing the crime and letting them scatter. And I made a different choice." Caleb met his eyes steadily. "You can be angry about that, but you don't get to question my integrity." Huang exhaled sharply, then sat down across from him. "You're right. I apologize. I've spent too long thinking like a lawyer and not enough time remembering what principles actually look like in practice." He opened his briefcase, pulling out documents. "For what it's worth, your report was thorough enough that I've already been able to trace 3 of the shell companies back to a common registered agent. We're getting closer to identifying the beneficial owners." "How close?" "Close enough that whoever's running this operation is going to be desperate, which is why Victor wants you in protective custody until the board meeting." "I'm not hiding." "You're not hiding. You're being strategic about your survival. There's a difference." Huang pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. "The board meeting is going to be a bloodbath. Half of them have approved these grants personally. They're going to claim ignorance, blame staff, point fingers at each other, and you're going to be the only person in that room with documentation that can't be spun or dismissed. What does Victor want from me? The truth, presented clearly and without editorializing. Let the evidence speak for itself." Huang met his eyes. "He also wants you to know that regardless of what happens in that meeting, your position at this company is secure. You did exactly what he asked you to do. Be thorough and honest. He's not going to punish you for that." "Even if it destroys the foundation he built to honor my father's memory?" "The foundation was already destroyed the moment someone started stealing from it. You're just the one brave enough to say it out loud." Huang started organizing documents into presentation folders. "Now let's make sure we have enough evidence that no one can dismiss this as a misunderstanding or accounting error." They spent the next 3 hours preparing. Huang walked Caleb through courtroom-level presentation techniques, how to state facts without interpretation, how to respond to hostile questions without getting defensive, how to let data tell the story instead of emotional appeals. It felt less like preparation for a board meeting and more like preparing to testify at a trial. At 2:30, Diane Chen knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "The board is assembling early," she said, her professional mask firmly in place but tension visible around her eyes. "Mr. Voss would like you to join him in his office before the meeting starts." Caleb followed her down the hallway, past executive assistants who avoided eye contact and closed office doors that radiated crisis. Victor's office looked like a war room, documents spread across every surface, 2 additional lawyers conferring in hushed tones, and Victor himself standing at his window with the posture of a man preparing for battle. "Thank you, Diane," Victor said without turning around. "Close the door on your way out." After she left, Victor faced Caleb directly. "I need to tell you something before we go into that meeting. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Caleb's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "Your father didn't just save my business. He saved my life in a much more literal sense." Victor's voice was carefully controlled. "I was suicidal when I came to him that day. 31 years old, drowning in debt, convinced I'd failed at everything that mattered. I had a plan, a bottle of pills, a note written to people who I thought would be better off without me. I don't understand what this has to do with, your father saw it. I don't know how, but he saw it in my face, in the way I was putting my affairs in order, and instead of just giving me financial advice, he spent 6 hours talking me through why my life had value beyond my balance sheet. He made me promise I'd give him 90 days to help me fix the business before I made any irreversible decisions, and then he mortgaged his house." Caleb felt the weight of that revelation settle over him like a physical presence. "He never told me any of that." "He wouldn't have. Thomas wasn't someone who needed credit for doing the right thing, but I need you to understand that when I hired you, when I gave Adrienne the resources to investigate the foundation, when I'm about to walk into that boardroom and potentially destroy relationships with people who've been with me for 20 years, I'm doing it because your father taught me that integrity matters more than comfort. And I refuse to let his memory be attached to a company that steals from people who need help." Victor extended his hand. "Whatever happens in that meeting, I want you to know that I'm grateful you had the courage to tell me the truth." They shook hands, and Caleb felt something shift in his understanding of the man in front of him. Victor Voss wasn't just a billionaire CEO protecting his reputation. He was someone trying to honor a debt that went deeper than money, trying to live up to the example of a man who'd saved him when he was broken. The board meeting took place in a room designed to intimidate. Leather chairs arranged around a table that could seat 20, walls lined with portraits of previous board chairs, windows offering a view that suggested power and permanence. 11 people were already seated when Caleb entered. Executives, investors, foundation board members, all of them radiating the kind of wealth and influence that made normal rules feel optional. Adrienne sat near the end of the table, the only woman in the room besides an executive whose name Caleb didn't know. Her eyes met his briefly, communicating something he couldn't quite interpret. Worry, maybe. Or warning. Victor took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I know several of you had to cancel important commitments to be here, and I appreciate your flexibility. We have a situation that requires immediate board attention and decisive action. I understand there are questions about foundation accounting," one of the older men said, his tone suggesting he considered this a waste of his valuable time. "Surely this could have been handled through normal audit channels rather than an emergency meeting?" "Under normal circumstances, yes." Victor gestured to Caleb. "This is Caleb Mercer, our senior systems analyst. I asked him to conduct a comprehensive security review of the Foundation's financial systems. What he found requires this board's immediate attention. Caleb, please present your findings." Caleb stood, his printed report in hand, and faced a room full of people who had the collective power to destroy his career with a single phone call. He thought about his father, who'd faced his own moment of impossible choice and chosen to help someone anyway. He thought about Maya, safe with Mrs. Rodriguez, trusting that her father would come home. And he thought about the millions of dollars that were supposed to help people who actually needed it. Over the past 4 years, approximately $24 million has been diverted from the Voss Foundation's charitable programs into a network of shell organizations that exist only on paper. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, demanding clarification, denying possibility, questioning Caleb's credentials and methodology. Victor let it run for exactly 30 seconds before holding up one hand. "Let him finish." Caleb walked them through it systematically. The shell companies with fake addresses, the board members who existed across multiple fraudulent organizations, the transaction timing that coincided with legitimate grant approvals, the pattern that was too deliberate to be accidental and too sophisticated to be the work of a single low-level employee. He showed them screenshots, transaction records, incorporation documents. He presented data analysis that highlighted the systematic nature of the theft. And he did it all in the flat, factual tone Huang had coached him to use. No accusations, no interpretations, just evidence. When he finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Finally, one of the board members, a man in his 70s who Caleb recognized from photographs as a major investor, spoke carefully. These are serious allegations. What's your evidence that these transactions were fraudulent rather than legitimate grants to organizations we simply haven't heard of? I verified each organization against state nonprofit registrations, Caleb replied. None of them have functioning offices, staff, or operational programs. The addresses are mail drops. The phone numbers are disconnected. The tax filings show minimal activity. And the board members listed across multiple organizations are either fictitious or their identities have been stolen. That doesn't prove the foundation knew they were fraudulent when the grants were approved. No, it doesn't, but it does prove that someone with access to foundation approval processes systematically directed money to organizations they had to know didn't exist. Whether that was done with this board's knowledge or without it is a question for investigators, not for me. Another board member, a woman in her 50s, leaned forward. Who else has seen this report? Just Mr. Voss and Mr. Huangong, Caleb said. And now this board. Has it been shared with any regulatory authorities? Not by me. Though I understand there's already an SEC investigation underway based on information from another source. The room exploded again, this time with accusations flying between board members. Someone had leaked to regulators before the internal investigation was complete. Someone had tried to get ahead of the scandal. Someone was trying to control the narrative. Adrienne stood, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. The source of the SEC investigation is irrelevant right now. What matters is that we have documented evidence of systematic fraud, and this board needs to decide immediately whether we're going to conduct a legitimate investigation or circle the wagons and hope it goes away. Adrienne, this isn't the time, one of the men started. This is exactly the time, she interrupted. My husband built this foundation to honor a debt he owed to a man who saved his life. That man was Thomas Mercer, Caleb's father. And I will not sit here and watch this board dismiss evidence of theft from charitable programs because it's inconvenient or embarrassing. Victor's expression revealed nothing, but Caleb saw his hands tighten slightly on the armrests of his chair. Adrienne is right, Victor said quietly. This foundation exists because someone helped me when I was desperate and had nowhere else to turn. If we're now using it to steal from people who are equally desperate, then we've perverted everything it was supposed to represent. The only question is what we do about it. We need an independent investigation, Robert Huang said, speaking for the first time. Internal audit, external forensic accountants, full cooperation with regulatory authorities. Anything less looks like a cover-up. An investigation like that will destroy the foundation's reputation, someone protested. Donors will pull funding, programs will shut down. You're talking about hurting the very people we're supposed to help. No, Caleb said, the word coming out harder than he intended. The people who stole $24 million hurt those people. An investigation just names what already happened. The elderly investor studied Caleb with renewed attention. You're Thomas Mercer's son. Yes, sir. I met your father once, 20 years ago, at the fundraiser for small business development. He was the most unassuming man in the room, but when he spoke about ethical accounting practices, everyone listened. The man's expression softened slightly. He would have done exactly what you're doing now, even knowing the cost. Especially knowing the cost, Caleb said quietly. Then I move that we authorize a full independent investigation, grant Robert Huang whatever resources he needs, and cooperate completely with regulatory authorities. The investor looked around the table. Anyone want to vote against that and explain to shareholders why? The vote was unanimous, though several members looked like they were swallowing glass. Victor stood. Robert, you have full authority to investigate and report findings directly to this board and to appropriate law enforcement. Caleb, your audit work is now evidence in an active investigation. You'll continue to have security protection and full access to whatever systems you need. And to everyone in this room, if you had any involvement in these fraudulent transactions, voluntary cooperation now will be viewed more favorably than forced disclosure later. The meeting dissolved into smaller conversations, alliances shifting visibly as people calculated their exposure and options. Caleb gathered his materials, suddenly exhausted, and found Adrienne waiting by the door. "You did the right thing," she said quietly, "even though I asked you not to." "Why did you go to the SEC before I submitted my report?" "I didn't." Her expression was troubled. "I thought Huang did, but he's claiming he didn't either, which means someone else on this board knew what was coming and tried to get ahead of it. Someone who's guilty? Or someone who wants to look innocent by being the whistleblower?" Adrienne glanced back at the board members, still arguing in hushed clusters. "Be very careful, Caleb. You just made some powerful people very desperate, and desperate people with resources do unpredictable things." Caleb left the executive floor with his security escort, his mind churning through implications. The investigation was official now. The evidence was documented. The board had voted to pursue the truth. But someone had tried to grab Maya before any of this became public. Someone had sent threatening texts about interrupting her education. And now someone on that board knew exactly who Caleb was and what he'd found, and how much danger he represented to their freedom. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Rodriguez with a photo of Maya doing homework at her kitchen table, the elephant sitting beside her. The caption read, "She's safe and happy. Don't worry about anything except staying safe yourself." Caleb stared at the image of his daughter, focused on her schoolwork, trusting that her father would handle whatever adult problems existed outside her awareness. The weight of that trust felt heavier than any corporate crisis. He was escorted back to his temporary conference room and told to remain there until Victor or Huang cleared him to leave. Through the windows, he watched the sun set over the city, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. At 7:30 p.m., the door opened. Victor walked in alone, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past 5 hours. "3 board members have resigned," he said without preamble. 2 more have lawyered up and stopped responding to communications. The SEC has officially opened an investigation and issued document preservation orders, and our stock price dropped 4% in after-hours trading on rumors of foundation impropriety. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, because he didn't know what else to say. "Don't be. You exposed cancer that was killing something I cared about. The surgery is painful, but it's necessary." Victor sat down heavily. "Robert Huang has identified the beneficial owner of the shell companies, or at least the name on the corporate registration documents." Caleb's pulse quickened. "Who?" "Diane Chen." The name hit like a physical blow. Diane, who'd welcomed him on his first day, who'd escorted him to Victor's office, who'd delivered the folder of legitimate foundation partners and subtly warned him about questioning the foundation's integrity. "Are you certain?" "The Delaware corporate records list her as the registered agent for 6 of the shell organizations. We're working to confirm the rest, but the pattern is clear." Victor's expression was hollow. "She's been with me for 12 years. I trusted her with everything: hiring, personnel decisions, confidential strategic planning, and apparently she's been stealing millions the entire time." "Where is she now?" "Gone. She left the building around 4 p.m., right after the board meeting ended. Her apartment is empty, her car is missing, and her phone goes straight to voicemail. Robert has already contacted the FBI." Caleb processed this, his mind racing through implications. "She tried to grab Maya. She was monitoring my work. She knew I was getting close before I even submitted the report." "Which suggests she had access to your audit files somehow, either through surveillance or through someone else on your team." Victor stood, walking to the window. "I've initiated a full security review, but until we know how deep this goes, you need to remain under protection. I've arranged a hotel room under a corporate account that isn't traceable to you. Security will take you there tonight. You'll stay until the FBI confirms Diane is in custody." "What about Maya?" "She's safer where she is. If Diane is desperate enough to run, she might be desperate enough to try using your daughter as leverage." Victor turned back to him. "I know this isn't what you signed up for when you applied for a job here. I know your life has been turned upside down because I asked you to be honest. But I need you to hold on just a little longer until we know this is finished." Caleb thought about his apartment, empty and quiet, about Maya's room with her art supplies and her elephant, and her carefully arranged stuffed animals, about the life he'd built that was supposed to be stable and safe and normal. "How long until it's finished?" "Days if we're lucky, weeks if we're not. The FBI is treating this as financial fraud and flight risk. They'll issue warrants, freeze accounts, track her movements. But until they actually find her, we have to assume she's still a threat. The security escort took Caleb to a hotel near the airport, a generic business traveler facility where he checked in under a name that wasn't his and rode an elevator to a room that could have been anywhere. He sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like industrial detergent and stared at his phone, at the photo of Maya doing homework, at the life he desperately wanted to get back to. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered carefully. Caleb Mercer? A woman's voice, professional and clipped. This is Special Agent Sarah Morrison with the FBI. I understand you're the analyst who uncovered the Voss Foundation fraud. Yes. I need you to come in for an interview tomorrow morning. We have questions about your investigation and your relationship with Diane Chen. My relationship with her? You've had multiple private meetings with her over the past 2 weeks. You've received documents from her, and according to our initial review, you're listed as an authorized user on several of the shell company bank accounts. Caleb's blood ran cold. That's not possible. I never had access to those accounts. Then we have some things to discuss. I'll have agents pick you up from your hotel at 8 a.m. Please don't leave the premises before then. The call ended, and Caleb sat in the silence of a hotel room that suddenly felt less like protection and more like a cage. Diane had framed him, or tried to. She'd set up his access credentials as a fallback plan, a way to shift blame if she was caught. And now the FBI thought he might be involved in the very fraud he'd exposed. He called Robert Huang. I know, Huang said before Caleb could speak. The FBI contacted me an hour ago. Diane was very thorough in her planning. She created digital trails that suggest you helped her set up the shell companies, emails that appear to come from your account, access logs that show your credentials being used to approve fraudulent grants. None of that is real. I know, but proving it's fabricated is going to take time and forensic analysis. Until then, you're a person of interest in a federal investigation. How do I prove I'm innocent? By doing exactly what you've been doing. Tell the truth. Answer their questions honestly. Let the evidence show that you were investigating this fraud, not participating in it. Huang paused. And Caleb, get a lawyer. A good one. Don't talk to the FBI tomorrow without legal representation. After he hung up, Caleb stared at the ceiling of a hotel room in a city where he'd lived his entire life, feeling more lost than he'd ever been. He'd done the right thing, exposed the fraud, reported it through proper channels, protected the foundation his father's sacrifice had helped build. And somehow, he'd ended up here, alone in a hotel room, separated from his daughter, facing federal investigation for crimes he'd actually stopped. His phone buzzed one more time. A text from a number he didn't recognize. You should have taken the deal when you had the chance. Now you're going to lose everything. Caleb deleted the message and turned off his phone. Then he lay in the dark and tried to remember what his father's voice had sounded like when he was alive, when life was simpler, when doing the right thing seemed like it should be enough. The lawyer Robert Huang sent arrived at 6:30 a.m., a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Patricia Winters, who walked into Caleb's hotel room carrying a briefcase and an expression that suggested she'd dealt with federal investigations before and wasn't particularly impressed by them. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence the FBI shared with Robert, she said, declining coffee and getting straight to business. Diane Chen was meticulous in her framing. She created a digital paper trail suggesting you helped establish the shell companies, approved fraudulent grants, and received payments into accounts bearing your social security number. Caleb's stomach dropped. I never opened any accounts. I know. The forensic timeline doesn't support it. The accounts were created before you even applied to work at Voss Global Solutions. But proving fabrication to the FBI's satisfaction requires more than just your denial. We need to demonstrate that Diane had both the technical access and the motive to frame you specifically. The motive is obvious. I was investigating her fraud. Actually, the motive is more complex than that. Patricia pulled out a tablet showing him a timeline. Diane started setting up these shell companies 4 years ago, but she only began creating false trails linking you to them 6 months ago, right around the time Victor Voss started asking questions about foundation accounting irregularities. She knew an audit was coming. She just didn't know who would conduct it. So she prepared multiple fall guys? Exactly. We found similar fabricated trails pointing to 3 other analysts in your department. Whoever ended up doing the audit would have found themselves implicated in the fraud they were investigating. It's actually brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way. Caleb leaned against the hotel room wall, trying to process this. How do we prove I wasn't involved? By demonstrating that every piece of evidence against you was created using Diane's administrative credentials, your actual work history, your personal financial records, your complete lack of connection to Delaware corporate law. All of that supports your innocence. But the FBI doesn't clear people quickly. They're careful and methodical, which means you're going to be under investigation for weeks, possibly months. I can't stay separated from my daughter for months. I know, which is why we're going to be very strategic in this interview. You tell the truth, you don't speculate, and you let me handle any questions that venture into areas where your answers could be twisted. Patricia's expression softened slightly. I've read your audit report, Caleb. It's thorough and honest and exactly the kind of documentation that helps prove innocence. You did good work. Now we just need to make sure the FBI recognizes that. The FBI field office was a fortress of bland functionality, all security checkpoints and fluorescent lighting, and the carefully neutral expressions of people who'd heard every possible story about innocence. Special Agent Sarah Morrison met them in a conference room that smelled like coffee and the residual tension of 1,000 interrogations. "Thank you for coming in voluntarily," she said, her tone professional but not hostile. "I want to be clear that you're not under arrest. This is a witness interview. But given the evidence we've uncovered linking you to the fraudulent accounts, we need to understand your role in this situation." "My client is happy to cooperate fully," Patricia said before Caleb could respond. "But let's establish some baseline facts first. When did you first become aware that Caleb Mercer existed?" Morrison pulled out a file. "Our investigation began 3 days ago when we received information from the SEC about possible foundation fraud. Caleb's name appeared in preliminary document review yesterday." "And when were the shell company accounts actually created?" "Initial accounts were established over a 4-year period starting in 2021. Mr. Mercer applied to work at Voss Global Solutions in September of this year. He was hired in October and started work 3 weeks ago, so the accounts were created years before he had any connection to the company or access to foundation systems." Morrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "That timeline is noted in our records. Then we should also note that every piece of evidence linking my client to these accounts was created within the past 6 months, using administrative credentials belonging to Diane Chen. The timestamps are all there in the system logs. Diane had the access and the expertise to fabricate this trail. Mr. Mercer had neither. That's what we're here to determine." Morrison turned to Caleb. "Walk me through how you came to conduct the foundation audit." Caleb did, carefully and chronologically. His hiring, Victor's personal meeting, the audit assignment, his methodical investigation of the financial systems. He explained how he'd found the shell companies, traced the money flows, documented the patterns. He showed her copies of his actual work files, with timestamps that proved he'd been investigating the fraud, not facilitating it. "When did you first meet Diane Chen?" Morrison asked. "My first day. She handled new employee orientation." "And how many private meetings did you have with her?" 3 that I remember. She briefed me on the audit assignment, gave me background materials on foundation partners, and checked in on my progress." "Did she ever ask you to access specific accounts or approve specific transactions?" "No. She gave me general guidance about what Victor wanted from the audit, but she never directed my actual research." Morrison made notes, her expression unreadable. "Did you know that your credentials were used to approve 6 fraudulent grants totaling $2.3 million? Caleb's blood ran cold. "That's not possible. I never approved any grants. I don't even have authorization to approve foundation spending." "Someone using your login credentials did, on 3 separate occasions over the past 2 weeks. Patricia intervened smoothly. "I assume you've pulled the access logs showing where those approvals originated?" "Diane Chen's office computer, using Caleb's credentials, which she had administrative authority to access and utilize." "So what you actually have is evidence that Diane used my client's stolen credentials to approve fraudulent grants, then tried to make it appear that he was involved. That's not evidence of his guilt. That's evidence of his being framed." Morrison closed her folder. "That's one interpretation. But we need to rule out the possibility that you and Diane were working together and she's now setting you up to take the fall alone. If I was working with her, why would I conduct an audit that exposed the entire fraud? Caleb asked. Why would I document everything and report it to Victor? Why wouldn't I just submit a clean audit and let the stealing continue? Maybe you got cold feet. Maybe you wanted to look like a hero. Maybe the plan was always to expose a partial scheme while hiding the full extent of your involvement. Morrison leaned forward slightly. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying these are questions we have to answer before we can clear you. The interview continued for 3 more hours. Morrison walked Caleb through every detail of his investigation, every meeting, every decision point where he could have chosen to hide evidence instead of exposing it. Patricia objected strategically, protecting Caleb from speculation while letting him tell the complete truth about his work. Finally, Morrison stood. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll need to verify everything you've told us, which will take time. In the meantime, don't leave the state and keep us informed of any changes to your contact information. Am I still a suspect? Caleb asked. You're a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. There's a difference, but not a large one. Morrison's expression softened fractionally. For what it's worth, your story is consistent and your documentation is thorough. That counts for something. Patricia walked Caleb out of the building into morning sunlight that felt surreal after hours in windowless rooms. How bad is this? Caleb asked. Honestly, it could be worse. Morrison is smart and careful, which means she'll actually follow the evidence instead of just looking for an easy conviction. But federal investigations move slowly, and you're going to be in limbo until they either charge Diane or formally clear you. How long? Weeks at minimum, possibly months if Diane stays missing. Patricia handed him her card. Don't talk to anyone about the investigation without calling me first. Don't post on social media, don't discuss this with coworkers, and definitely don't try to conduct your own investigation into where Diane might be. Just live your life as normally as possible and let the professionals do their work. Caleb returned to the hotel, exhausted and anxious, to find a message from Victor asking him to come to the office. The security escort that had become his constant shadow drove him back to Voss Global Solutions, where the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. People moved through hallways with the tense efficiency of employees who knew their company was in crisis and their jobs might not survive it. Victor's office looked like he'd been living there. Empty coffee cups, rumpled shirt, the kind of fatigue that came from days of crisis management without sleep. The FBI interviewed you, Victor said. It wasn't a question. For 3 hours. They think I might have been working with Diane. I know. Morrison called me afterward to verify your employment timeline and audit assignment. Victor rubbed his face. I told her that you're either the most incompetent criminal I've ever met, or you're exactly what you appear to be, an honest analyst who did the job I asked him to do. What did she say to that? That incompetent criminals exist, so my character assessment isn't dispositive. But she also said your documentation was the most thorough she'd seen in a corporate fraud case, which suggests someone who actually cares about proving the truth rather than hiding it. Caleb sat down without being invited, too tired to maintain professional formalities. Have you heard anything about Diane? The FBI tracked her to a hotel near the Canadian border. She checked in under a false name but used a credit card that was traced to one of the shell companies. They raided the room this morning. She was gone, but she left behind a laptop. What was on it? Everything. Complete records of the shell companies, the fraudulent transactions, the money laundering scheme, and a folder labeled with your name containing all the fabricated evidence she'd created to frame you if the audit ever exposed her. Victor's expression was grim. She also had files on the 3 other analysts she'd set up as potential fall guys. She was prepared to sacrifice any of you to protect herself. Relief flooded through Caleb so intensely it was almost painful. So the FBI knows I wasn't involved? Morrison called me an hour ago to say they're shifting their focus entirely to locating Diane. You're no longer a person of interest. You're a witness and a victim of identity theft. Victor stood, extending his hand. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Caleb. You did everything right, and the system still treated you like a criminal. That's not acceptable. They shook hands, and Caleb felt something release in his chest. Tension he'd been carrying since the moment Adrienne had appeared in his kitchen however many days ago. It felt like years. What happens now? He asked.
Now we rebuild. The foundation will continue operating, but with completely new oversight and controls.
The board members who resigned will be replaced with people who actually understand their fiduciary responsibilities. And you'll continue working here, if you still want to after everything this company has put you through. I need this job, Caleb said simply. Maya needs stability. We need the health insurance and the steady paycheck, and the chance to build something that isn't constantly falling apart. Then you have it. And more than that, I'm promoting you to Director of Financial Systems Security. Significant raise, better benefits, and the authority to implement whatever controls you think are necessary to prevent this from ever happening again. Caleb stared at him. You're promoting me? While I'm still connected to a federal fraud investigation? You're connected as the person who exposed it, not the person who perpetrated it. That's exactly the kind of judgment and integrity I need in a leadership position. Victor's voice was firm. Your father saved my life by taking a risk on someone he barely knew. The least I can do is take a risk on someone who's proven their character under pressure. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept the position and help me make sure this company actually lives up to the principles your father embodied. Caleb accepted. That afternoon, security cleared him to go home. The escort drove him to his apartment, swept it for any signs of intrusion, and finally left him alone in a space that felt both familiar and strange after days away. He walked through rooms that Maya had last occupied almost a week ago, seeing her art projects on the walls, her toys carefully organized, her elephant's twin sitting on the couch where she'd forgotten it. He called Mrs. Rodriguez. Caleb, thank goodness, I've been so worried.
Maya keeps asking when her daddy is coming to get her. Can I come get her now? Is that okay? Of course, she'll be so happy. She's been very brave, but I can tell she misses you. I missed her too, more than I can explain. An hour later, Caleb stood on Mrs. Rodriguez's porch, and Maya came running out so fast she nearly knocked him over. He caught her, lifting her up, feeling her arms wrap around his neck with the desperate strength of a child who'd been scared her father might not come back. You promised, she said into his shoulder. You pinky promised you'd come home. I always keep my promises, baby. Always. She pulled back to look at his face, checking for truth. Can we go home now? Yes, we can go home. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway, her eyes bright with tears she was trying to hide. You take care of that little girl, mijo. I will. Thank you, Elena, for everything. That's what neighbors do. We take care of each other. Back in their apartment, Maya insisted on showing him every piece of art she'd made while staying with Mrs. Rodriguez. Drawings of them together, paintings of flowers, a clay sculpture of an elephant that was slightly lopsided but unmistakably made with love. Mrs. Rodriguez said you had to do something important at work, Maya said as they made dinner together, her standing on a stool to help stir pasta. Was it scary? Caleb considered how to answer honestly without burdening her with details she didn't need. Sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but it's still important to do it. Like when I told the teacher about the lady who tried to pick me up? Exactly like that. You did the right thing even though it was probably scary, and I'm very proud of you. Was your thing like my thing? Very similar. Someone was doing something wrong, and I had to tell the truth about it, even though it was hard. Maya stirred the pasta thoughtfully. Did you get in trouble? For a little while, people thought I might have done something wrong, but then they figured out I was actually trying to help, so it worked out okay in the end. Like in stories where the hero gets blamed for something they didn't do, but then everyone realizes they were good the whole time? Caleb smiled despite everything. Yes, exactly like that. I knew you were a hero, Daddy. She said it so matter-of-factly, with such complete faith, that Caleb had to turn away for a moment to collect himself. He wasn't a hero. He was just a father trying to do right by his daughter and honor the memory of a man who'd quietly sacrificed more than anyone knew. But if Maya saw him that way, maybe that was enough. The FBI caught Diane Chen 4 days later at a border crossing in Montana. She'd been trying to enter Canada using a fake passport, but border security had flagged her because she matched a federal warrant. She was arrested without incident and extradited back to face charges of wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, and a dozen other counts that would likely keep her in prison for the rest of her life. The news hit the company like a shockwave, confirming what everyone had suspected but transforming it from rumor
into verified fact. Caleb watched from his new office, an actual office, with a door and a window and space for the personal items he'd never had room for at his desk, as the story played out across business news channels. Former Voss Global Solutions executive arrested in multi-million-dollar charity fraud. Whistleblower analyst exposes corporate theft. Foundation to implement new oversight after systematic fraud. His phone rang constantly with interview requests from reporters who wanted the inside story, the emotional narrative, the dramatic tale of a struggling single father who'd risked everything to expose corruption. Patricia advised him to decline all of them. "Your story is compelling, but it's also evidence in an ongoing prosecution," she said. "Anything you say publicly could be used by Diane's defense attorneys to claim she can't get a fair trial. Wait until after the criminal case concludes. Then tell your story if you still want to." Caleb was fine with that. He'd never wanted to be a public figure anyway. He just wanted to do his job, raise his daughter, and build a life that was stable enough that she'd never have to worry about whether her father would be there when she woke up. Victor called him to the executive floor a week after Diane's arrest. Adrienne was there too, sitting in one of the leather chairs with a legal pad full of notes. "The foundation board has asked Adrienne to take over as executive director," Victor said. "She spent the past week developing a complete restructuring plan that addresses every vulnerability Diane exploited." Adrienne looked tired but determined, her earlier polished composure replaced with something more raw and focused. "I want you to review the plan from a systems security perspective. Tell me where the holes are, what could still be exploited, how we make this actually foolproof instead of just looking good on paper." She handed him a document that was easily 100 pages long. Caleb skimmed it, impressed by the thoroughness: independent auditors, rotating oversight, multi-signature approvals for large grants, quarterly forensic reviews, public transparency requirements. "This is comprehensive," he said. "It would make fraud like Diane's nearly impossible." "Nearly isn't good enough," Adrienne replied. "I want completely impossible. Because if this foundation is going to continue using your father's sacrifice as its moral foundation, then it has to actually live up to that standard." Over the next month, Caleb worked with Adrienne to implement security protocols that were genuinely robust. They hired external auditors, established whistleblower protections, created public dashboards showing exactly where foundation money went. It was tedious, unglamorous work that would never make headlines but would actually prevent future fraud. Maya settled back into her routine: school, art class, therapy sessions with Dr. Reyes, where she processed the scary parts of the previous weeks through drawings and play. She didn't talk about it much, but occasionally she'd ask questions that revealed she'd understood more than Caleb had realized. "Daddy, if someone is doing something bad, you have to tell the truth about it, even if it's hard, right?" "Yes, baby. Even if telling the truth makes other people mad at you. Especially then, because the truth matters more than people being comfortable." "Okay, just making sure." Caleb had no idea what situation at school had prompted that question, but he was grateful she was learning the lesson young. 3 months after Diane's arrest, the foundation held its first public board meeting under the new transparency requirements. Caleb attended as Director of Financial Systems Security, sitting in a room with donors and community partners and representatives from the nonprofit organizations that actually did the work the foundation was supposed to support. Victor stood at the podium looking older but somehow more solid than he had before the crisis. "We failed," he said simply. "We failed to protect the resources entrusted to us. We failed to implement adequate controls. We failed the people who needed our help most. And I take personal responsibility for those failures." He outlined the complete restructuring, the money recovered from Diane's accounts, the enhanced oversight and transparency measures. Then he did something Caleb hadn't expected. The analyst who exposed this fraud did so at significant personal and professional risk. He could have stayed silent. He could have submitted a false report to protect his job. But he chose integrity over security, honesty over comfort. And in doing so, he honored the legacy of his father, Thomas Mercer, whose quiet sacrifice 23 years ago made this foundation possible. Victor gestured to Caleb. "I'd like to recognize Caleb Mercer publicly for his courage and his commitment to doing the right thing, even when the cost was real." The room applauded. Caleb stood awkwardly, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding that this mattered to Victor. This public acknowledgement that honesty had value that whistleblowers deserved protection rather than punishment, that the foundation was committed to learning from its failures. After the meeting, several nonprofit directors approached Caleb to thank him personally. One woman, who ran an educational program for underprivileged students, gripped his hand tightly. "My program received a grant that was supposed to be $2.5 million, she said. "We only got $1.8 million. I raised questions about the discrepancy, but I was told it was administrative overhead. Now I know that $700,000 was stolen by someone who didn't care that it was supposed to help kids get to college." "I'm sorry that happened," Caleb said. "Don't apologize. You fixed it. You made sure it won't happen again. That matters more than you probably realize." As winter settled over the city, Caleb's life found a rhythm that felt almost normal. He went to work each day at a company that had been through crisis and emerged stronger. He picked Maya up from school, helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences where her teacher praised her artistic talent and her growing confidence. He paid bills on time, took Maya to movies on weekends, and slowly rebuilt the financial stability that had been so precarious for so long. The promotion had come with a substantial raise, enough that Caleb could afford to move them to a better apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and windows that actually sealed properly, and a neighborhood where Maya could walk to a better school. But when he mentioned it to her, she looked uncertain. "Do we have to move?" "We don't have to do anything. I just thought you might like more space, a nicer place. But Mrs. Rodriguez is here, and my friends at school, and I like our apartment. You fixed it up nice." Caleb looked around their small living room, at the water stains he'd painted over and the secondhand furniture he'd arranged carefully and the walls covered in Maya's artwork. It wasn't much by most standards, but it was theirs. They'd survived here. They'd built something here. "Then we'll stay," he said. "This is home." On a cold Saturday in December, 6 months after everything had started with Adrian in his kitchen, Caleb took Maya to visit his father's grave. They'd gone a few times since the funeral, but never with the weight of understanding what Thomas Mercer had actually done, who he'd actually been. Maya placed flowers on the gravestone while Caleb stood quietly, trying to find words for everything he wanted to say to a man who couldn't hear him. "Grandpa helped people, didn't he?" Maya asked. "Yes, he did. Even when it was hard? Especially when it was hard." "Like you did?" Caleb knelt beside his daughter, putting them at eye level. "I learned it from him, from watching how he lived his life, even when I didn't understand all the choices he made. He taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing." "I want to be like that too," Maya said seriously. "When I grow up." "You already are, baby. Every day." They stood there together in the quiet of the cemetery, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest, a sense of continuity, of legacy, passed down not through grand gestures, but through small choices made consistently over time. His father had helped a stranger because someone needed help. Caleb had exposed fraud because people deserved the truth. And someday Maya would face her own impossible choice and hopefully remember that character was built in exactly these moments. At work on Monday, Adrienne stopped by his office with coffee and an expression that suggested she had something specific to discuss. "The foundation is establishing an ethics award," she said without preamble. "An annual recognition for employees who demonstrate exceptional integrity in difficult circumstances. We're calling it the Thomas Mercer Award for Ethical Leadership." Caleb set down his coffee carefully. "You're naming it after my father?" Victor insisted. "He said your father saved his life by showing him that character matters more than success. And you saved the foundation by showing us that honesty matters more than comfort. It seemed appropriate to honor both of you by recognizing others who make similar choices." "What does the award involve?" $50,000, a scholarship fund for the recipient's children, and a permanent position on the Foundation's Ethics Oversight Board. Adrienne smiled slightly. "And before you ask, you're not eligible. You're the inaugural recipient, but the award itself will go to other employees going forward." "I don't need an award for doing my job." "You need your daughter's college education to be secured. You need the recognition that what you did had value. And the company needs to send a clear message that whistleblowers will be protected and rewarded, not punished." Adrienne's voice softened. "Let us do this, Caleb. Let us make something good come from everything you risked." He accepted because he understood it wasn't really about him. It was about building a culture where the next person who found evidence of fraud would feel safe reporting it, instead of hiding it. It was about honoring his father's quiet sacrifice by making it visible, giving it weight, turning it into something that could inspire others. The award ceremony took place in January, a formal event with employees and board members and local press. Victor gave a speech about Thomas Mercer's life, not the dramatic parts, but the quiet consistency, the small acts of integrity that added up to a legacy of decency. He talked about the mortgage taken out for a stranger, the promise to help others, the refusal to seek credit or recognition. And then he talked about Caleb, about the audit that exposed fraud, about the choice to submit an honest report instead of a safe one, about the weeks of investigation and uncertainty, and the vindication that came from simply telling the truth. When Caleb stood to accept the award, he looked out at a room full of people who'd witnessed the company's crisis and its recovery. He thought about his father, who'd done the right thing without witnesses or recognition. And he thought about Maya, sitting in the front row with Mrs. Rodriguez, watching her father receive an award for being brave. "My father never talked about the sacrifice he made for Victor Voss," Caleb said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "He just did it because someone needed help, and he had the power to provide it. I think he'd be uncomfortable with all this attention, honestly. He wasn't someone who needed recognition. He just needed to know he'd done the right thing." He paused, looking directly at Maya. "But I have a daughter who needs to know that doing the right thing matters, that honesty has value, that standing up for truth is worth the cost. So I'm accepting this award not for myself, but for her. So she'll remember that her father and her grandfather both believed that character is built in the moments when no one's watching, and everyone would understand if you took the easy path." The applause was genuine. Caleb returned to his seat, and Maya climbed into his lap, hugging him tightly. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she whispered. "I'm proud of you too, baby." Life moved forward. Diane Chen was convicted on 17 counts of fraud and sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The foundation recovered $19 million of the $24 million stolen, with the remainder traced to offshore accounts that were frozen pending further legal action. The new oversight protocols worked exactly as designed, preventing 2 attempted fraud schemes in the first year and creating a model that other corporate foundations began adopting. Caleb settled into his role as Director of Financial Systems Security, building a team of analysts who shared his commitment to thorough documentation and ethical oversight. He dated occasionally, but nothing serious. Maya remained his priority, and finding someone who understood that proved harder than the fraud investigation had been. On the anniversary of the day Adrienne had appeared in his kitchen, Caleb received a letter from her. She'd left the foundation 6 months earlier to start a nonprofit consulting firm, helping other organizations implement transparency and accountability measures. The letter was short but meaningful. "Thank you for being brave when I asked you to compromise. Thank you for doing the right thing when I suggested the strategic thing. And thank you for showing me that integrity isn't just a principle. It's a practice that requires daily recommitment. Your father would be proud. I know I am." Caleb put the letter in a box with other important documents: Maya's birth certificate, his father's will, the award certificate from the foundation, the final FBI letter clearing him of any wrongdoing. These were the papers that told the story of his life, the evidence that he'd survived and somehow built something worth keeping. That evening, Maya asked him to help with a school project about family history. She'd been assigned to interview a parent or grandparent about a time they'd made a difficult choice. "Tell me about Grandpa Thomas," she said, her recorder running, her expression serious in the way children got when they were working on something important. Caleb told her everything, about the stranger who needed help, about the mortgage and the promise and the quiet sacrifice that changed someone's life, about the years of watching from a distance, making sure that help had mattered, about dying with medical debt, but leaving behind a legacy of integrity that survived him. "That's a good story," Maya said when he finished. "But it's sad, too, because he helped someone and then didn't get help when he needed it." "That's true, but I think he was okay with that, because he didn't help Victor Voss to get something back. He helped him because it was the right thing to do." "Is that what you did, too, at your job?" "Yes. I found something wrong and told the truth about it, even though it was scary and could have gone badly." Maya turned off the recorder and looked at him with eyes too old for her age. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be like you and Grandpa.
I want to help people even when it's hard. You already do, baby. Every day you're kind to your friends. Every time you tell the truth, even when it's easier to lie. Every moment you choose to be brave instead of comfortable. You're already being like us. She climbed into his lap, something she still did even though she was getting too big for it, and they sat together in the quiet of their small apartment while the city moved around them, full of people making choices, building legacies, deciding who they wanted to be.
Years later, when Maya graduated from college on a full scholarship funded by the Thomas Mercer Award, when she gave a valedictorian speech about integrity and courage and the legacy of ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply by refusing to compromise their principles, Caleb would remember this moment. This quiet evening when his daughter decided who she wanted to become. But that was still years away. For now, there was just this: a father and daughter in a small apartment, building a life together, honoring a legacy of quiet sacrifice by living it forward one honest choice at a time. The next morning, Caleb woke to sunlight and the sound of Maya singing in her room. He made coffee in the French press Adrienne had used that first impossible morning, and he thought about his father, about Victor, about the choices that connected them all across decades, turning one man's sacrifice into another man's empire, into a daughter's secure future. He thought about the moment in Victor's office when he could have submitted a false report and set a trap, about the FBI interview where he could have lied to protect himself, about all the small moments when taking the easy path would have been understandable and no one would have blamed him. And he was grateful, truly grateful, that he'd chosen differently. Not because it had worked out, not because he'd been vindicated or awarded or promoted, but because when he looked in the mirror, he recognized the man staring back. Because when Maya asked him about making difficult choices, he had honest answers. Because the legacy his father had left him wasn't money or status or comfort, but something far more valuable. The knowledge that character mattered, integrity had weight, and doing the right thing was its own reward. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, Caleb poured coffee and started breakfast and called out to his daughter that it was time to get ready for school. Ordinary moments in an ordinary life, made extraordinary by the simple act of living with integrity. His father had mortgaged his house for a stranger. Caleb had exposed fraud to protect people he'd never meet. And Maya would someday make her own impossible choice and hopefully remember that she came from a long line of people who believed that doing the right thing mattered more than doing the easy thing. That was the real legacy. Not the awards or the recognition or the foundation bearing his father's name. Just the quiet knowledge that when it mattered most, when the cost was real and the outcome uncertain, they'd chosen truth over comfort, integrity over security, character over convenience, and in the end, that choice had made all the difference.